All right, folks, Nathan here, and we are in, the book Corinthians. The book's available at the moment, not as an audiobook, obviously, but unless you're listening to this when it is finished. But anyway, it's available on Chalcedon or on Amazon. Check it out. So the chapter title is The Day of Man versus the Day of the Lord. Let's go. All right. 11. The Day of Man. Actually, what we're going to do here is we have a bit of a gain problem. So let's just whack it up full here, see what happens. Awesome. More power, baby. 11. The Day of Man versus the Day of the Lord. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 to 13. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. But with me it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. For I know nothing by myself, yet am I not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is the Lord. Therefore judge nothing before the time, until the Lord come, who both will bring to light the hidden things of darkness, and will make manifest the counsels of the hearts, and then shall every man have praise of God. And these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes, that ye might learn in us. Some kind of artifact there. Self and to Apollos for your sakes, that ye might learn in us. There was a bit of a click there. I'm not really liking that at all. Just going to check something quickly here. Do you know what? I have all the processing going in this channel, which is not at all good. I have an oral exciter. Oh, no. Okay, well, this is going to drop different. This is going to hit different then. Okay. As the counsels of the hearts, and then shall every man have praise of God. And these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes, that ye might learn in us not to think of men above that which is written, that no one of you be puffed up for one against another. For who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now, if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou hadst not received it? Now ye are full, now ye are rich, ye have reigned as kings without us, and I would to God ye did reign, that we also might reign with you. For I think that God hath set forth us the apostles last, as it were appointed to death. Okay, you can see how this waveform has gone down as I've turned the processing off, which is counterintuitive. I'm not liking that one little bit, I have to say. And I would to God ye did reign, that we also might reign with you. For I think that God hath set forth us the apostles last, as it were appointed to death. For we are made a spectacle unto the world, and to angels, and to men. We are fools for Christ's sake, but ye are wise in Christ. We are weak, but ye are strong. Ye are honourable, but we are despised. Even unto this present hour we both hunger and thirst, and are naked, and are buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place, and labour, working with our own hands, being reviled, we bless, being persecuted, we suffer it, being defamed, we entreat, we are made as the filth of the world, and are the offscouring of all things unto this day. With Jesus Christ's coming as the second and last Adam, there are now two human races openly competing for world dominion and power. Two different moral standards govern men and nations, that of fallen man and the new life and faith of redeemed man. Unless we recognize that these two standards are sharply opposed, we shall be living under the illusion of a common standard and law governing all men and nations. But for the world of the fallen Adam, to be as God, to be one's own lawmaker and source of morality, Genesis chapter 3 verse 5, is the essence of freedom and justice. The standard of this realm is, let man be free, let man be his own God. For the world of the last Adam, the premise is very different. Let God be God, for he is the only true God and lawgiver. In verse 1, Paul tells us how he and the other apostles are to be accounted. He uses two words, huperetas, ministers serving under their Lord. In Luke chapter 1 verse 2 and Acts chapter 26 verse 16 it means pastor, preacher. Normally it means an under-officer or assistant to a superior, a minister, someone who ministers in the name of a superior. The second word translated in verse 1 as steward is oikonomos, meaning house manager. It is virtually identical to our word economy. In the Greek, oikos is house and nemo, manage. Paul and the apostles are ministers of Christ and stewards of God, not of men. To view their pastors as their ministers and stewards was a serious offence. It was presumptuous to see these pastors as bound to their service rather than the Lord's. All men are required to serve God, not themselves, nor men in any Okay. Oh well, it's quicker. Why is it quicker? Okay. All right, hope you're well, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Nope, try again. Us to see these pastors as bound to their service rather than the Lord's. All men are required to serve God, not themselves, nor men in other than a secondary sense at best. Paul in verse 3 says that it is a very small thing that I should be judged. Yeah, I'm concerned about this whole gain situation. I don't know what the situation is with the gain at all now. Yeah. Okay. Nor men in other than a secondary sense at best. Paul in verse 3 says that it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. Paul does not say that their judgment does not hurt him, only that it is Paul does not say that their judgment does not hurt him, only that it is a small thing. Because God is his judge, Paul does not judge himself. He obeys God's law word and leaves it to God, the judge, to render judgments. His duty as a steward is to be found faithful. Verse 2. A man does not set his own pay or assess his own worth when he works for someone else. He seeks to be faithful. As a result, Paul makes no judgment concerning himself. This does not justify him because the Lord is his judge. Verse 4. In verse 3, by man's judgment is in the Greek literally, by man's day. God has his judgment day at the end of history, but sinful man passes judgment daily on his fellow man, on his fellow men. But, try again, man's day. God has his judgment day at the end of history, but sinful man passes judgment daily on his fellow men. God waits until our lives are complete, but we jump to judgment not only every day, but sometimes more than once a day. Paul says in verse 4 that he knows of nothing against himself, but this is not I inserted at there in my mind. Paul says in verse 4 that he knows of nothing against himself, but this is not the heart of the matter, For neither he nor other men are his judge. The Lord alone is his judge. Where the things of the Lord and his work are concerned, God is our judge. Therefore, judge nothing before the time. Verse 5. There are requirements that judgments be made by us according to God's law. We are to judge righteous judgment. John chapter 7 verse 24. That is, righteous according to God's law. Until the Lord come, most things are left. Most things. Okay, I didn't quite get the gist there. Oh, okay. All right. John chapter 7 verse 24. That is, righteous according to God's law. Until the Lord come, most things are to let... Quote, let's try quote. Quoth he, John chapter 7 verse 24. That is, righteous according to God's law. Quote, until the Lord come, end quote. Most things are to be left to God unless they are plain violations of his law. At the great judgment, all things shall be made manifest, and then every man, and then shall... I have my mind elsewhere. At the great judgment, all things shall be made manifest, and then shall every man have praise of God, if it be due them. Paul thus speaks not only of condemnation at the judgment, but of praise also. This applies, he says, to your judgments about Apollos and myself. There is no zeal for the faith in such judgments by men, but self-promotion. The issues are confused by partisanship, so that moral delinquency was disregarded in favour of their partisan views. Verse 6. Then, in verse 7, Paul states the issue. They all stand, not in their merit, but by God's grace. This is one of the greatest verses of Scripture. For who maketh thee to differ from another, and what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now, if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou hadst not received it? One of the great illusions about humanistic churchianity is that we came to the faith with certain qualities and merits of our own. Though saved by grace, we assume that what we brought to the point of conversion was ours by merit, heredity, race, or some like factor. Paul simply negates this pretension. We brought nothing to our conversion that was not already an aspect of God's sovereign decree and grace. We are totally derivative creatures and can boast of nothing. With their inflated self-worth, many in the Corinthian church saw themselves as kings in the new creation ahead. Paul ridicules them, and then adds that, if the dawn of the new creation were just ahead, he too would be reigning, not just they. They are judging him as though they are kings, and he is a prisoner. They are not the only possible kings, if such they are. Verse 8. The apostles are now last in popular estimation, as it were appointed to death, a spectacle to the world, and to angels, and to men. Verse 9. We apostles are regarded as fools on account of Christ, whereas you see yourselves as wise. We are weak before men, and you are strong. You are honourable, but we are despised. Verse 10. To be an apostle, Paul says, means persecution, hunger, thirst, being reduced to nakedness, beaten and homeless. Verse 11. They are brutally treated. They've had to support. Okay, well, what a devastating message. Beaten and homeless. Verse 11. They are brutally treated. They have had to support themselves, most notably Paul. They are persecuted and defamed, treated as the filth and the offscouring of the world, as human trash. The apostles were treated as scum. This is what Paul is saying. They were accused of turning the world upside down. Acts chapter 17, verse 6. The world saw them, not as saints, but as madmen and evil. Two worlds were in collision, the world of fallen men and the world of Jesus Christ and his new human race. Paul's grief was that men who should belong to Christ's new humanity were giving, in effect, aid and comfort to the enemy, a problem with us all. Paul, therefore, does not spare the Corinthians because he knows that he will answer to God for them. It was not the sins of the world that upset Paul. What else could one expect from fallen men? It was the sins of the church. This is the reason for the very great relevance of 1 Corinthians. It is a summons to the church in every age to be Christ's, not man's. Paul's use of, quote, the day of man, end quote, as against, quote, the day of the Lord, end quote, is very telling. The prevailing power of, quote, the day of man, end quote, governs the church all too often. Governs the church all too often. Governs the church. Governs the church. The day of man, end quote, as against, quote, the day of the Lord, end quote, is very telling. The prevailing power of the day of man governs the church all too often. It is this humanistic judgment that men fear and move in terms of, which is a very great sin. Quote, the day of man, end quote, is a continuous backbiting judgment by men on one another, whereas God's great day is at the end of history. A present-oriented people will serve the day of man and live in fear of its judgments. Paul's total trust is in the day of the Lord. Quote, the day of man, end quote, is all around us, but it is a trivial matter as against the day of the Lord. The Bible sees mankind divided into two groups, the humanity of the first Adam, the fallen human race, and the humanity of the last Adam, Jesus Christ, the redeemed human race. But the world doesn't want to see that kind of division and denies it in favour of races, nationalities, colours, black and white, red or yellow, whatever the case may be. It has its own lines of division, even though it knows those are false. But the biblical line of division is between fallen mankind and redeemed mankind. And we must learn to live with that recognition that it is the only division that counts with God. I don't want no weird. This is a weird wavy form. I'm just not totally happy with it. But another thing is the problem of these. Let's check it out. You see, why is it not doing the automatic foldy thing? It is there, but it's not elsewhere. This is a problem. This is costing me time. See, that's interesting. All right, well, okay, folks. Well, I don't know if you should enjoy this or not, but there you go. That was chapter 11, and the next one will be chapter 12, Gossip versus Power. So catch you all on the flip side, homies.